Launching the Antiquities Act of 1906, President Teddy Roosevelt created the nation's first national monument designation, Devil's Tower National Monument in Wyoming. The important purpose of this act was to preserve, for all Americans, significant pieces of the country's history. Ecology. Geology. And beauty. But unlike America's great national parks, size is not important for monuments. Historic sites and other units of the national park system. Monuments are typically established by presidential proclamation, chosen as their personal memorials of the most special parts of this great country. However, occasionally these units of the park system are established by the direct action of Congress. Some are big, some are small. Some garner large budgets and staff, others next to none. And some eventually gain national park designation. America's treasures tell the story of the nation's past and present glory. Yellowstone, Yosemite, Great Smoky Mountains, and the Grand Canyon. These are the crown jewels of America's magnificent national park system. But there are three other great national parks. National parks that began as monuments. Each preserves a unique and pristine ecosystem. Grand Teton National Park, a complete glacier-carved Rocky Mountain ecosystem. Joshua Tree National Park, displaying the mid-latitude Mojave Desert ecosystem. And Olympic National Park, containing a primeval temperate rainforest ecosystem. Olympic National Park, located on Washington's Olympic Peninsula, spans several different ecosystems. From the dramatic peaks of the Olympic Mountains to 70 miles of wild Pacific coastline to the picturesque subalpine forest to hiking and backpacking trails that cut through its old-growth temperate rainforests. The lush forests in the park's Quinault, Queet, Hoh, and Bogoshiel valleys are some of the most spectacular examples of primeval temperate rainforests in the lower 48 states. These rainforests once stretched from southern Oregon to southeast Alaska. But little remains outside of protected areas such as Olympic National Park. In 1897, the area received its first national designation as Olympic Forest Reserve by President Grover Cleveland. In response to concern about the area's disappearing forests. 8 years later, in 1909, President Teddy Roosevelt, as part of his early monument designations, set aside part of the forest reserve as Mount Olympus National Monument to protect the habitat of Roosevelt elk. Then in 1937, after President Franklin D. Roosevelt visited the Olympic Peninsula, he was so impressed by its splendor that following year he signed the act creating Olympic National Park. In 1953, an additional stretch of the Pacific coast was added. Among the roads that take the visitor into the mountain's epicenter and the subalpine meadows, Hurricane Ridge Road is by far the easiest. Nearly a mile above sea level, Hurricane Ridge offers the easiest place to view the Olympic Mountains. The Olympics have the form of a cluster of steep-sided peaks, surrounded by heavily forested foothills and incised by deep valleys. The crown of the mountain range is Mount Olympus. At 7,980 feet, it is the tallest and most prominent mountain in the Olympic Mountains. What's odd about this glacier-covered mountain is that you can only see it from Hurricane Ridge and other mountain peaks, not from the many surrounding urban centers. The subalpine forest at Hurricane Ridge is a transition zone from dense forest below to alpine tundra above the tree line. The tree line is not really a line, but rather a zone where trees gradually get smaller, as you can see here. It's almost like entering a Japanese bonsai garden. The subalpine meadow is also the best place to see the diminutive black-tailed deer, a mammal that is the park's most graceful animal. In late summer, it's wonderful to see them with their Bambi-like fawns frolicking in the meadows. The Pacific Beach unit of the park is accessed by a number of roads leading to short hikes to the beaches and coastal features. Clear Lock is one of the most visited areas of Olympic National Park. Clear Lock and Ruby Beach are located on the southwest coast of the Olympic Peninsula. Known for log-strewn sandy beaches, it is a good place to spot the spouts of gray whales as they migrate in the spring and fall. Not far from these beaches, Beach 4 is an excellent location to tide pool at low tide, looking on rocky outcrops for anemones and starfish of various colors. Further north along the coast is the highlight of the park's coastal unit, Rialto Beach. Here, the visitor finds rocky beaches, giant drift logs, pounding waves, and views of the dramatic offshore islands known as sea stacks. Sea stacks are blocks of erosion-resistant rock isolated from the land by the sea. Relentless pounding by waves eroded the softer, weaker parts of the rock first, leaving harder, more resistant rock behind. Some even have small forest ecosystems growing on top of these picturesque islands. But for most people, the highlight of a visit to Olympic National Park is a walk through a primordial temperate rainforest. A rainforest that is perhaps the most dramatic example of original old-growth woodland in the country. A place remarkable not only for its longevity, but also for its haunting features. In the rainforest, the subtle dripping of wet needles make it imperative to touch one of the giant Sitka spruce or a towering Douglas fir. In the eerie darkness, sunlight slips through the cracks in the canopy. Here, trees almost reach out to touch you because they're older, bigger than trees in any other forest. Here they are, draped with club moss, sprouting ferns, and the trunks and vines crusted with lichen. It's all very magical. Ecologically, the temperate rainforest is drenched in over 12 feet of rain annually. The result is a lush green canopy of both coniferous and deciduous species, including giant western hemlocks, Douglas firs, and Sitka spruce trees. Ecologists say that there is more biomass in this ecosystem than in any other ecosystem on the planet. There may be 500 tons of living things per acre here, which is why in 1976, Olympic National Park became an International Biosphere Reserve, and in 1981 was designated a World Heritage Site. Joshua Tree National Park is one of the great spiritual and mystical places on the planet.
The desert is a place to go purify yourself. I mean, you get this certain energy, and with the heat and the kind of the clean, crisp air, it feels like a place, everybody goes to go and meditate on something.
Joshua Tree was designated a national monument in 1936 by President Franklin D. Roosevelt and accorded national park status in 1994. Joshua Tree National Park is part of the Mojave Desert, a cold winter desert defined geographically by the presence of a plant species, the Joshua tree. People come to the park just to experience the twisted, bristled Joshua tree, producing a Dr. Seuss-like wonderland found nowhere else on Earth. Joshua trees can grow up to 40 feet high. They are neither trees nor cacti, but a member of the yucca family. Some researchers think an average lifespan for a Joshua tree is about 150 years, but some of the largest Joshua trees in the park may be much older than that. Spectacular stands of Joshua trees can be found throughout Joshua Tree National Park. Also found in Joshua Tree are boulders. Boulders everywhere. Giant sculpted boulders piled upon boulders. Boulders that are not only there for viewing, but for rock climbing. Joshua Tree welcomes climbers, boulderers, and highliners from around the world. This high desert granite climbing mecca is famous for its traditional style crack, slab, and steep face climbing. Joshua Tree offers challenges for all ability levels with more than 8,000 climbing routes, 2,000 boulder problems, and hundreds of natural gaps to choose from. It is truly a world-class climbing destination. Where the Mojave Desert merges with the lower Colorado Desert, far from the main attractions near the northern entrance to the park, there is a highly unusual and visually stunning desert grove that seems to appear out of nowhere. A grove made up entirely of the fuzzy, almost friendly-looking teddy bear cholla, also known as jumping cholla. Don't be fooled by the fuzzy appearance, however. The cholla cactus is one of the most tenacious and painful cacti in the park. The Mojave exhibits the most extreme temperature range throughout the year of any place in the nation. Summer weather is dominated by intense heat. It can soar above 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Winter temperatures can drop below 20 degrees Fahrenheit. The Mojave Desert creates xeric conditions with only a few plants well adapted to this hot, dry environment. In addition, most of the valleys are internally drained, so all precipitation that falls within a valley does not flow to the ocean. The result is that only a handful of plants can survive these harsh conditions. In addition to cacti and yuccas, other desert plants include the desert holly with its silver-colored leaves, pickleweed, a succulent that stores absorbed salt within special cells in its stems, and 3 species of mesquite trees, which are actually members of the legume family. And of course, there are the park's 2.5 million Joshua trees, the sentinels of the Mojave Desert. There are many ways to experience the sheer grandeur of the Teton mountain range, but none like an aerial view. The plane takes off from Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Immediately below is the Snake River. Originating in Yellowstone Park to the north and flowing south, the Snake eventually joins the Columbia, which empties into the Pacific Ocean. You are now over Grand Teton National Park. Between the river and the Teton mountain range are numerous mountain glacial features, moraines and kettle lakes. Suddenly, looming almost out of nowhere, are the Grand Tetons themselves. Matterhorn-like peaks, glacial valleys, and stunning ice fields. Grand Teton's journey to present-day park status is long and unusual. In 1897, Congress set aside Teton Forest Reserve. 32 years later, the central peaks seen here were given national park status. However, in order to preserve the views and the territory's complete ecosystem, the post-glacial features to the east of the Tetons also needed to be protected. So in 1943, Franklin D. Roosevelt issued a presidential proclamation creating Jackson Hole National Monument, a 221,000-acre Jackson Valley tract of land. Finally, in 1950, the National Monument and the original park were joined into today's spectacular Grand Teton National Park. Moving on to the northern reaches of Grand Teton National Park is the breathtaking Jackson Lake. The lake was created during the last ice age, when a massive ice field gouged and cut its deep reservoir. It is still fed by runoff from small glaciers in the Teton Mountains. The main source of water, however, is the Snake River. At an elevation of 6,772 feet above sea level, Jackson Lake is one of the largest high-altitude lakes in the U.S. 15 miles long, 7 miles wide, and 400 feet deep. Without any foothills, the Teton mountain range seems to spring up directly out of the earth. Its cathedral group of peaks energizes and delights the eye. Each perspective, each season, each passing hour brings a new sense of awe. Rising up only 10 million years ago, the range is the youngest in the Rockies. However, it was the ice ages over the last 1.8 million years that carved the Tetons into their rugged pose. A pose accented by its present-day mountain glaciers.
The requirement for a mountain glacier, or for any glacier for that matter, is that the snow that has fallen the previous winter doesn't melt the following summer. And so we have to have a continual buildup of the ice. And clearly, the place where the snow has the best chance of remaining through the annual cycle, through the next summer, is at the highest altitudes where the temperatures are the coldest. So when snow falls in the mountains over the wintertime, obviously it's above the snow line, and it's going to be at the highest elevations. When the snow accumulates and doesn't melt the following summer, then we start to build up the mountain glaciers. Glaciers at all times are going to be flowing. The ice deforms plastically or ductily, and the ice is always flowing, and it's drawn downhill by gravity, and so if we're constructing glaciers at the highest peaks of the mountains, gravity is drawing that ice downward, and as that ice moves downward, it starts to erode the rock over which it's been laid down. As the rock begins to erode, there's preferential areas that the glaciers are going to flow, just like there are preferential river valleys that rivers will flow. And so when we look at the highest mountain peaks, the glaciers will start to sculpt certain sides of the mountains. And they generally do this on a more or less triangular fashion, so that there's faceted slopes or faceted scalloped slopes on 3 or more sides of the mountain. It's those faceted areas or scalloped areas that are called cirques, and the cirques are separate from one another by a knife point edge, generally, that's called an arête. So it goes cirque, cirque, and in between is the arête. Those cirques are really the birthplace of the glacier, and that's where the accumulation of snow is going to continually feed the glaciers as they tend to move down the valley and continually carve out those cirques.
There is no better place in the continental United States to view cirques and the pyramid-shaped peaks called glacial horns than in Grand Teton National Park. The park also contains one of the most complete collections of Western North American mammals. 61 species of mammals live beneath the towering peaks of the Teton Range. They are found in each of the 4 major ecological communities in the park: alpine, montane forest, sagebrush flats, and wetlands. Mule deer and moose browse on shrubs growing along the edges of the waterways. Small bands of pronghorn antelope, the fastest land animal in North America, forage throughout the day. And of course, large herds of buffalo roam the wide open spaces. Elk leave the shade of the montane forest at dawn and dusk to eat the grasses growing among the surrounding prairie. And the highlight of any visit to the park, particularly in spring, both grizzly and black bears can be found searching for food after a long winter sleep. For many people, Grand Teton National Park is the southern gateway to the hydrothermal wonders of Yellowstone National Park.